Welcome back to a new episode of Skin to It, your guide to healthy skin.
I'm Marlo, fashion stylist and beauty enthusiast.
And I'm Dr. Sandy Skotnicki, your trusted dermatologist.
Today we're diving into an exciting new episode.
We're going to break down everything you need to know about the most important skincare myths. We're going to debunk them with Dr. Michelle Wong and share tips to help you care for your skin like a pro.
So grab your notepads and let's get skin to it.
So today we have a great episode. We're going to be debunking skincare science. We have a very special guest all the way from Sydney, Australia, Dr. Michelle Wong, also known as Lab Muffin Beauty Science. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Michelle is a chemistry PhD. She's a cosmetic chemist, a science educator, renowned for her ability to demystify complex skincare science. She has over 600,000 followers on Instagram and over 170 on TikTok. And she recently published her first book, The Science of Beauty, Debunk the Myths and Discover What Goes into Your Beauty Routine. We have it here for listeners. You can't see it, but we're going to chat a little bit about it. And thank you again so much for joining us. So for our guest, we have half of our episodes this season are about having guests. And we really like to learn about your journey. We want to start off sort of a personal, how did you get interested in chemistry, your passion for skincare science, communication, and we'd really like to know the story behind Lab Muffin.
Yeah, so I started writing Lab Muffin as a blog back when I was doing my PhD. So I was studying, I was doing medicinal and supramolecular chemistry. So in the lab, I was looking at how different molecules would interact with your body, and I was looking at skincare products. And so I started wondering, obviously, how do these ingredients work on my skin? What are they actually doing? What receptors might they be interacting with? And this was back in 2011. So this sort of information was just not online. There were maybe 2 sources back then that had anything about the science part of skincare. So I started digging into the literature, and then I started looking things up, and sometimes I would have to go like multiple papers deep, multiple textbooks deep. And I was also looking at nails at the time. So I used to do a lot of nail art, and I was in a few nail polish communities, and people would ask me questions like, do I need to avoid all these ingredients in my products? I'm pregnant. Do I need to change what products I'm using? And so I started just writing up all the stuff I've found into a blog because, first off, I have a terrible memory. So I wanted it as a reference for myself after doing all this legwork. And also I figured a lot of people outside of them must also have the same questions as me.
Right.
And then I guess I was doing that, graduated from my PhD, and then I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, which was like a sort of recurring theme. I started teaching at a tutoring college in Australia. So we have these really big tutoring colleges here. And yeah, I started teaching classes of, I think it was like, it started off being 15, and then every once in a while I would have like a full lecture size of like about 100, over 100. And I guess as I was teaching, I started using my hands a lot. I started, drawing on the whiteboard and stuff. And I realized how limiting writing was. So I started also doing videos. I think in between, I also started on Instagram to try to promote the blog, and then started on YouTube to get a bit more animation going so I could actually show, I think the first one I did was actually with alpha hydroxy acids.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people were asking, why do they need to be a low pH? So I was demonstrating with an animation why you needed that. It's because when you have a low pH, then you can make them neutral and they can go into skin. So just showing that animation,
Right.
I really wanted to show it. So I started making videos. Yeah.
Right.
Amazing.
Well, that's great. And the term muffin, like Lab Muffin, does that mean anything specifically?
It was just one of those things where when I really needed to start the blog, I'd been tossing over starting it for about a year, maybe 2 years by that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, right, I just need to like find a name and start. I can change the name later once I think of a better name. So it was just like Muffin was my ex-boyfriend's name for me, and I was sitting in a lab, stuck them together. I was like, that's nice. And it's unique enough that it's very SEO friendly.
You
Back in the
remember
day.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so I have to say, I did a deep dive on I went straight to TikTok, and the way you explain things is just
Yep.
amazing, especially for somebody who obviously is not a scientist or a doctor. I absolutely loved it. You are so to the point and you get it right out there. And I love how you just take you take people down. I mean, you're just like, this is the real deal, right? What was the first topic, like a real myth that or like a topic that you tackled that really resonated? So something that was out there, you made a video about it and it just went kind of
Crazy.
viral.
Yeah.
There's been a few. I think the biggest ones are always like when someone is saying this ingredient is going to give you cancer or any sort of really big, scary myth like that, because I think it's very easy to fall for that.
Mhm.
I think when we see that kind of thing,
Did you have a first one though that kind of tipped the balance and said, okay, this is going well. I'm going to keep doing this because because people were really like desperate for proper information. I mean, that's partly why we're doing this podcast and I wrote my book and I know why you do it. I mean, but what was the sort of tipping point where it's like, yeah, I really need to continue to do this?
that's a good question. I
Ah,
think maybe parabens. I think
yeah,
talking about parabens might have been the first one because like they're so demonized, but
I
at
know.
the same time, I'm sure you know this as well, like
Yeah.
they're so good. They're very good at what they do. They're
Hmm.
actually not very allergenic. They're safe for most
Yep.
people's skin,
Yeah.
compared to a lot of the other more allergenic preservatives like MIN and MCI.
So let's actually get into some of like that, with respect to MCI. So that's a preservative, listeners. Was sort of epidemic in 2012. We saw it. I think Michelle. My interest is allergic contact dermatitis. So one of the things that drives me crazy, and I'm really been excited about this episode because I kind of know my answers, but I want to see, and I've learned a lot from you. I want to see where you stand on some of these things. And I wanted to just preface that Marlo is one of my best friends. She's not a scientist, she's not a doctor. And the reason why I think this podcast is so great is because she sort of represents the people that we're talking to, and the questions that sometimes she'll ask through an episode are what people really want to know. So from my point of view, I feel like there's when you're a cosmetic chemist, I don't know how much of that you actually do. Why does there so many ingredients in products? Like there's just too many ingredients. Like really you need 10 or a few more for something to function properly. I just wanted your perspective. And if you are asked to consult with companies, do you say, listen, less is more. Let's not put so many things in. What's your sort of take on all that?
Oh, that's a really good question. A lot of the time, it depends so much on the product, first off. Sometimes some products do need a few more ingredients. Sometimes there are special delivery systems. Sometimes there are particular blends that just work better. So, for example, if we have a cleanser, we need surfactants. We need water to dilute the cleanser. We need surfactants, which are the cleaning ingredients. They're the things that actually do the cleaning, the foaming, that kind of thing. And it turns out if you have more than one surfactant, that works really well. It turns into what are called mixed micelles. So
Mm,
micelles are like the little bubbles that the surfactants, which are like little tadpole things, they turn into little bubbles, which are
mhm.
like the tadpoles all are facing outwards from like a little cluster.
Right.
And that's what helps to clean. And it turns out if you have multiple types of surfactants in that cluster, it
Right.
becomes a lot more gentle.
Okay.
Um,
So I didn't know that. So that's
yeah.
good. So that's
yeah.
something I
So,
learned. Yeah.
yeah. So that's one
So cool.
example. Sometimes there are also thickeners in there
Hmm.
to make it just more usable. So I don't know how many products you've tried, but I've tried a lot
Right.
because my background from my blog is reviewing products. I get sent a lot. And sometimes there are so many things we take for granted with products that sometimes when you get a really bad one, then you remember how terrible it is when products don't have this in mind. So sometimes you'll get a cleanser that's just too watery, for example,
Hmm.
spills off your hand, can't get it to foam, leaks
Right.
through your fingers, terrible. So there's lots of little things like that. But at the same time, on the flip side, I feel that sometimes there's just too many ingredients because
Yeah.
back in the day, some chemists put it in, some formulator put it in, and people were too scared to change it. They were like, "Oh, they must have put that in for some reason. We'll just keep that
Ah,
in there." So it's almost like superstitious at that point. When they
right.
reformulate it, they're just like, "Oh, well, I'm sure Gary knew what he was doing. Let's just keep that in there."
So that
So I
actually
feel,
happens.
yeah, I feel like there's a bit of that as well. And then sometimes it's just like, sometimes it's just a particular ingredient blend. Like I'm sure they could simplify it, but like that formula's been there for so long, then they're just like, we'll just tweak it in small ways.
Right.
Yeah, so there's lots of things like that. Sometimes ingredients come in blends, and it's just easier to use the blend.
Oh, I see. So one of the things that really drives me nuts is all the sort of flower extracts. I feel like they just throw a bunch of things in there to sort of maybe it makes it sound more exotic or more clean. When we're going to get to that whole spiel and fallacy, but would sometimes flower extracts come in blends?
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of the time, with ingredients that are kind of sprinkled in there, especially natural extracts, which generally most of them don't do very much. So,
Right.
if you have like a skincare product, you generally have one active that works really strongly, and then there might be a couple of supporting actives. So, you might have, let's say, something that targets pigmentation.
Mm-hmm.
It might be a bit irritating, so they might add like a few antioxidants in there, anti-irritant ingredients to try to counteract some of those side effects. But then after that, a lot of things might be sprinkled in there, just like in very small amounts
Mm-hmm.
that don't really work,
Mm-hmm.
just to have the name of the active on the product.
Right.
Sometimes there are companies who can get multiple actives to work, and that works really well. But a lot of the time, it will just be like a little
One.
bit for marketing purposes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like with natural extracts, especially a product with lots of natural extracts, they don't tend to work well in high concentrations. So a lot of the time when they're sprinkled in there, it is literally just to put that word on the
On the
product to
label.
try to get a point of distinction.
That's an interesting point because we were talking about in an earlier episode, like the concentration of an active in ingredients. Like we could take parabens for example. I mean, the EU is very strict on the concentration of methyl and ethyl paraben. So the dose is in the poison. So this is a very small amount. So what you're saying also is a lot of companies throw in a bunch of extracts,
Right.
and there's so small quantities in there. They're actually not really doing much. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's called like fairy dusting.
Fairy dusting. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
There you go. So I wanted to talk about sunscreens. I mean, we did a whole episode on sunscreen controversy, and I did a really deep dive. I learned a lot. I also learned a lot from you. I wanted to ask two questions, and because we could spend the whole episode talking about just sunscreen, especially recently with all the press and the FDA making comments on chemical sunscreen safety. So two things. What would you say to the listeners who don't know you that well? Try to give a concise answer, if it's possible, on the safety of chemical sunscreen filters. And number two, just because you're from Australia, I really wanted to know, I know what I think about the coral issue with benzophenone and different various filters, sunscreen filters, that it's more of a climate change thing. But we really want to hear from you on those two sunscreen issues. Myths.
All right, I'll try to be concise, but it is quite a complex topic. So,
Yes.
chemical sunscreens, by and large, are extremely safe.
Yep.
The toxicology, in terms of safety, the way that safety assessment's done is that they only allow 1% of an amount that should still be safe. So,
Okay.
if an ingredient is allowed at, let's say, 6%, that means that the safety assessment has said that it is actually safe when used at 600%. If you use it every single day. So it is a worst case scenario sort of situation. So there is already massive margins of safety built in. There are a lot of studies coming out showing that there are particular effects, but those studies need to be translated to what we do in everyday life. A lot of the time, those studies are finding very, very small effects, especially in animals.
Right.
So again, it is a massive, massive safety buffer.
Right.
And these concentrations are being lowered because we have better alternatives coming out. And it's really a process of making products that are already very safe even safer, because a lot of these effects are like 1 in 1 million, 1 in 100,000, those sorts of effects, which on a personal scale are not really big. But when you are a government regulating a product that is being used by millions of people, then that is worth reducing.
Right.
So I guess it's a situation where it's like, I don't know, statistics, that sort of thing. It's not very personal, if that makes sense. It's kind of like on a population scale, it is a risk, but on a personal scale, it's not really the big thing that you should be thinking about. Like the big things are always things like, are you getting your vaccines? Are you exercising? Are you eating generally a healthy diet? That kind of thing. using a different sunscreen is just not going to make a big difference in the big scheme of things.
I have a question just on that about, do you think benzophenone, because it's one that's mostly vilified, should be phased out? I think it is kind of being phased out just because it has so much negative press, because the European Commission, Scientific Commission, did decrease the percentage allowed in face versus body. They did change that. And that kind of made me pause a little bit, like, because they're the ones I kind of look to, because their scientists aren't being bought off by anybody. So I don't know. What do you think about benzophenone safety?
So I think that's benzophenone 3, oxybenzone. Yeah, so that one, I think, so they reduced the amount for body to 2.2% from 6%, and face is still allowed at 6%. So that kind of gives you an idea of the sort of safety buffers they're building in. It is for using sunscreen every single day all over your body, like a full body application.
Right.
And if you look into the detailed parts of the safety assessment, the effect that they're looking at is actually a tiny, tiny change in male rat fetuses. So again, it is like the most vulnerable stage of life is embryos inside women, or inside pregnant animals is what they're looking at, rats. And I think it was a decrease in like the anogenital distance, which means like the tiny little part of the body. So yeah, and I mean it's not even a necessarily negative effect. So massive safety buffers. And again, 2.2% means that they calculated that 220% in a sunscreen would still be safe.
Right.
So yeah, it's still massive safety buffers. It is still a process of making products that should still already be safe, unless you are using sunscreen every single day all over your whole body. It probably isn't something to massively worry about, but it is nice that overall it is being phased out. So usually the phase out times for the EU are, I believe it's something like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah,
there's like a bunch of different levels of phase outs.
Yeah.
So again, it's not like they're rushing out and knocking products out of people's hands based on new
No.
evidence.
Yeah. And actually I have a question on that. Like I kind of practice what I preach. I use mineral sunscreens day to day, but when I'm in high UV index, and I think we both do this, I use, a broad spectrum, long UVA chemical filter, and there's some new ones that are bigger. They're not being absorbed as much. What do you do? You live in Australia.
I personally use chemical sunscreens every day. I just can't handle mineral sunscreens. Like, first off, they make me look really white. And secondly, they clog my pores really badly.
Okay. So you, an expert on sunscreen safety, use chemical filter sunscreens every day in Australia. There you go. And then the coral.
So the National Academies put out a study a couple years back where they got like all the top marine scientists to come together and look at all the evidence on the safety of sunscreens to the environment. Obviously, this was triggered by a lot of those coral reef questions and the coral reef legislation that was coming in Hawaii and places like that. And they found that it's just not a big issue, first off. The big issues are things like climate change. The amount that sunscreens would be contributing is extremely small. And the other thing they found was that chemical and mineral filters completely overlap in terms of their effects. So one thing that people don't realize is that even though zinc oxide is natural, as in you can find it in the environment, you don't find it in high concentrations in water. Zinc itself is actually ecotoxic. So if you look up the safety data sheet for zinc oxide, you will see a dead fish symbol, which is like it's an environmental aquatic toxin.
My God, isn't that ironic? Yeah. So there you go. I learned that too. Thank you.
It's the thing I'm sure you come across all the time where people think natural is safe, but then natural things are full of allergens. It turns out they are not.
My standard response is poison ivy is natural and so is arsenic. So
exactly.
Anyway, moving on. Well, actually, you wanted to ask this question.
No, I have another question, and I mean, I pretty much know your answer, but I think it'd be interesting for our listeners to hear it from you. Is what your thoughts are on do-it-yourself sunscreens and like homemade skincare. I think people should hear this. Should hear this from you.
DIY sunscreen.
I guess homemade skincare in general. most of the time, it's not the worst idea. Like things like natural oils, like using coconut oil, for example, on your skin, that can be fine. Using it as a body moisturizer,
It
maybe
can give
doing like
acne though.
true, yeah.
Yes,
But I mean, lots of things can give acne, and some people don't get any acne from it. So,
that's true. Yeah.
if it works for you, then that one is safe. Some people like doing DIY yogurt masks, and that
Yeah.
should still be safe. But there are a lot of DIY things that are not safe. So things like lemon. Again, as a dermatologist, I'm sure you see this all the
Oh, yeah.
time when
Yeah.
people put like when people squeeze limes and stuff, they get the worst allergic reaction in the sun, or not
It's
even allergic.
it's
Yeah,
actually, yeah, it's a phototoxic. It
yeah.
increases the risk of sunburn. We actually had this outbreak in was a small company that made sunscreen for kids, and they put like bergamot and lemon or
Oh,
something, which increases your risk of, it's a phototoxic reaction, and it made the news. These kids were getting blisters on their face, and so it was the reaction from the essential oil, lemon and bergamot. Anyway, yeah, I don't think DIY anything with lemon is good. I agree with you on that one. But how about the
yeah.
sunscreens? Like this was really took off on, there was that Instagram couple that were making them in their kitchen for their kids. What's your thought on DIY sunscreens?
You can't make a safe DIY sunscreen at home.
Yeah.
Sunscreens are not that simple. Like a lot of people think 20% zinc, if I just mix 20% zinc into whatever base, beef tallow, coconut oil, whatever, then
Yeah.
I will get the same effect. That is not true. UV rays are very small. They can get through things that you can't see. So even if it looks like an intact layer, there are lots of microscopic holes, or there could be lots of microscopic holes. In reality, when a formulator makes a sunscreen, that takes a lot of
Mm-hmm.
optimizing to get to a high SPF, even with the same ingredients.
Right.
So being able to do that at home consistently is just not realistic.
Well, and I guess if you're going to be using zinc and you might kill some fish. And if you put lemon essential oil or something in your zinc, you're going to get a sunburn. So
Right.
bad idea.
Bad all around.
Okay, we're going to switch topics a little bit. I want to, so in my book, I wrote a book about the increased risk or reactions to personal care products. And I think a lot of listeners and public don't realize that allergy is actually not that common. The more common response is irritation. So as a cosmetic chemist and somebody that might help formulate, one of the things I always impress on patients when I patch test them or allergy test them and they're negative, and they say, well, I still react. There's this concept of products are tested in isolation. So when you take one product and you don't have any irritation, but then you add 5 more products all together at the same time, you get a cumulative irritant response. So from a chemistry point of view, what's your sort of thought on that? How do you explain it? I think that's the most common thing that we deal with as dermatologists, because people that react to their skincare, they're often not reacting from allergy. They're reacting because they use 10 products. Each product has 30 ingredients. It's 300 ingredients.
I completely agree. That's a massive problem, especially when people are seeing all these like 5-step skincare routines on TikTok,
Yeah.
and trying to emulate that. I think usually I tell people, introduce one product at a time, like one every 2 weeks, because then at least you can see first off if you will have an effect. And if you have a bad reaction, you know exactly which product it is.
Mm-hmm.
And also gives you a better idea of whether a product is working. So you can see if a product works, if you should still spend money on it, buy a new bottle if it's actually having an effect. If you're using 5 products at once, you won't even see that. Plus, that also cuts down on the irritant reactions.
Yeah, that's actually a great tip. I mean, I tell people to introduce things, remove and then reintroduce things every 1 to 2 weeks. But I also say make sure, because everything touches your face, right? Whether that's your hair, your hands, or your body. So when you're reintroducing or introducing, make sure you do one product, hair, face, body, hands, because it all ends up touching your face.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I thought.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about this trend of double cleansing. And I guess the debate between traditional soaps or versus synthetic detergent. I know Sandy and I talked about this, and
And I wrote a whole book on it. Yeah.
Yeah, she wrote a whole book about just cutting back and really using fewer and fewer ingredients and products.
Well, and also the fact that traditional soaps are high pH and they damage your skin and your skin barrier, potentially your microbiome, although it has the chance to reboot. So double cleansing and traditional soaps versus synthetic soaps. Your sort of take on that as a cosmetic chemist.
I personally like double cleansing if I'm using a water-resistant sunscreen or if I'm using a lot of makeup.
Yeah.
And I personally just like it because it means I have to scrub my face less to get it clean.
Right.
But I think it's completely a personal choice. It depends so much on the specific product. It depends so much on what you're wearing, what you're trying to get off your skin. So in general, I think the best guide is just how does your skin feel after you've cleaned it? So if you're using double cleansing, I mean, I even triple cleanse. So I use a separate eye makeup remover, like a gentle one that doesn't make me need to scrub off the waterproof makeup. Then I use a cleansing balm, and then I use a regular water-based cleanser. So that works really well for me. But then some people, they break out with cleansing balms. Some people, they don't wear much makeup. They could probably just use the most gentle cleanser and be fine. So yeah, it depends so much on what you're using. In terms of soaps versus synthetic detergents, I am a big fan of synthetic detergents for, I mean, I think it's very scientifically clear. The whole reason that the synthetic detergents were invented is because natural soap has a lot of drawbacks. Like you said,
Exactly.
high pH. Your skin likes to be at an acidic pH in general, so high pH can really disrupt it, especially during cleansing. So surfactants will disturb your skin barrier, and even if your skin is fine with, let's say, pH 7 water all the time, it might not be fine with a pH 7 cleanser. It's like a very different proposition to your skin.
Right.
And also, soaps tend to be very skinny in terms of their structure, which means they can burrow into skin deeper. Synthetic detergents are a lot chunkier, and so they have more trouble getting in. And a lot of the time in a properly formulated cleanser, there are multiple surfactants which will form a larger micelle. Again, this is just like a larger cluster that doesn't get into your skin as easily. It can't stay there and keep disturbing your barrier after you've tried to rinse it off.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's like a lot of things. I think a lot of people, again, think natural is safe.
Right.
If I have a soap that's natural and it's just got essential oils in it, that's like good for me. It's got extra olive oil to try to undo the effects of the soap. It's not quite that easy to undo the effects of these tiny, tiny surfactants.
Okay, so the next topic, sort of myth busting, is expiry dates. I mean, I know what I say to my patients, and for medication, as a physician, as a dermatologist, we often give scripts, and they're for meds, for medications, the expiry date is quite short because they put the expiry date at night. So when the expiry date on a package, it means there's 90% of the drug left. So it's a pet peeve of mine. We throw out so much good medication. I volunteered in third world countries. I've given out, 10-year-old penicillin. It works fine. But from one of the things that made me pause, and the reason I wanted to ask this question is the whole benzene, thing with the oxybenzone and in the benzoyl peroxide. So generally, with personal care products, do you adhere to expiry dates because maybe some of the actives are degrading into something that we don't like? Just want your sort of general take on that.
In general, with expiry dates, they are like a worst case scenario thing. It is really more of like a liability question rather than like what's actually happening. Like, I think a lot of people think at the expiry date, suddenly it's like, I know, Cinderella's carriage, it turns back into a pumpkin.
Right. So
And
it's
that's
not
just
like
not
that.
the case. It's like it's a gentle downward slope. If it's expired, it's riskier. So in some situations, you might not want to risk that, such as if you're about to go to the beach and you have an expired sunscreen,
Right.
especially because the sunscreen is not kept in ideal conditions. Most people are leaving it at the beach. It gets really hot, or in the car, and then it gets hot, cold, hot, cold.
Yeah.
And that is really good at destabilizing products. So if you have an expired product, it's probably safer to use it on a less risky area. So, for example, on your body rather than on your face if your face is sensitive. Now, with the benzene question, with benzoyl peroxide, there was a report by a company called Valisure that showed that there was benzene in products. They tend to make a massive deal out of very small amounts. So the actual amounts in benzoyl peroxide were incredibly tiny, especially given how little benzoyl peroxide people tend to use. It's not like a full body application, the way they compared it, they keep comparing it to the concentrations that are allowed in air. The problem is we inhale like,
Yeah,
I think
from
it's like
exhaust.
50 bathtubs of
Yeah.
air a day versus like you use a tiny blob of benzoyl peroxide. I think it's something like 500,000 tubes equivalent of air that we inhale.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, like it's a
And didn't
very different amount of benzene. And they also found that it wasn't, there was no relationship with age. So in other words, like the older the benzoyl peroxide, the benzene did not necessarily increase. So
I thought
yeah.
that was what part of the reason why they put it at some ridiculous temperature, right? Like
Yes.
the inside of a
Mhm.
car and it's 32 degrees out. And their argument was the reason they did that was to speed up the degradation process that happens with time. So you don't necessarily agree with that.
No. So usually with speeding up degradation, we put it at about 40 degrees Celsius, which
Hmm.
is 100-ish Fahrenheit. So only a little bit above room temperature, or not even if it's a really hot summer day. And so that's meant to approximate what happens. So I think it's like if you do that for 6 months, then you can approximate a longer period of storage at room temperature, say 2 years. The
Right.
problem is they put it at even higher than that. And the
Yeah.
higher you go, the more likely it is that you have a reaction that will never happen at room temperature.
Hmm.
So, for example, if you have an egg and you leave it on your countertop for like, I think it's about 2 days, then that is the equivalent of boiling it for like 3 minutes.
Right.
That obviously, like, if you leave an egg at room temperature, it doesn't cook in like 2 days. It's a
The other thing
completely different chemical reaction.
this is
Uh-huh.
totally
Interesting.
not
Yeah.
skincare related, but I used to have chickens and eggs. And if you don't wash the egg, you
Mhm.
keep them dirty.
Yeah.
Well, do you remember like you saw in farm like movies that the eggs are on the table, like on the kitchen counter for days.
Sure.
But as soon as you wash them and you remove all that bacteria and protective, they will go rancid much faster. I thought that
Yeah,
was
in
interesting.
Australia, we don't wash the eggs. So
Yeah,
our eggs come at room temperature
yeah, yeah,
in the
because
stores.
they're
So, yeah.
protected.
Yeah.
So just to wrap up the expiry date, I think the bottom line for listeners is it's worst case scenario. You can often use them past expiry. I would never use sunscreens because I think for all the reasons you just said, they're often put in scenarios where they're just degrading more faster. But and there's all this stuff about throwing out all your makeup because it's got bacteria growing in it. There's so much fear mongering with all that.
Mm.
Like, would you agree with that too? Like throwing out like an eye pencil. Like there's no water in it. Like why do you have to throw it out? I don't even know if they have expiry dates, but some makeup, there's a lot of
What about
that
mascara?
stuff. I don't know. What's your thought on makeup and expiry
Um,
dates?
Mascara, I would probably respect the expiry date just
Yeah.
because your eyes are more sensitive and like they are touching your
Mhm.
eyes. So there might be water going in. I've seen people add like all sorts of things to their mascara to try to make it wet again. And that's a terrible idea because
Yeah.
like you're just completely messing up whatever preservative system was in there that was designed for the original
Right.
product.
Good point.
Um,
Mhm.
Yep.
But with most things, like with eye pencils, where especially because if you're sharpening it, you are getting rid of the top layer each time.
Yeah.
Um, it is like a lot safer than I think a lot of people think. And I've seen I saw a dermatologist actually do a reel where she was sanitizing all her makeup, and one of them was a lipstick, and she dipped it in vodka, and it
Oh,
was just like, not only is it unnecessary, but it's probably making it worse because vodka doesn't have enough alcohol to sanitize. So
there's a
yeah.
lot of dermatologists doing some crazy things online. We're
As
gonna
as we've
we're
seen.
gonna maybe touch on that. So we did a whole episode last season on regulation, and I was just interested. I mean, I look to the EU, and I talk a lot about the sort of regulatory things in my book. I know you touched a little bit on it, but in Australia, like how do you compare their? First of all, do you think skincare is regulated enough? Do you think Australia is doing a good job? Do you agree with the EU? Do you think it's too draconian? Like it has too many, um, you know, rules and exclusions? So, just sort of your thoughts on that.
I think in general, in well-regulated marketplaces like the US, EU, Australia, products on the whole are safe, and the products in the EU and the US are much more similar than a lot of people think. Apart from sunscreens, which is like a whole separate story,
Yeah,
but
yeah, complicated.
most of the time, all the ingredients that are like banned or limited in the EU, the same regulations are like informally applied in the US as well, because if the EU has said that something is unsafe and companies in the US are using a very clearly unsafe amount, then they're
They can't.
open to getting sued. Like the US
Right.
loves suing. Like there's a big sue happy culture, which
Yeah.
a lot of EU regulators or people who work in EU regulation who I've talked to, they've actually said that they're quite jealous of it because even though the EU has what looks like more regulations, they're not enforced uniformly around over the EU because the way that it works is like the EU will have a law and then it's up to individual member states to actually work out how to enforce it.
Oh,
And
I
that
didn't
is
know that.
extremely spotty.
Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of the time, like the systems are different, but they largely end up at the same place.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so
Because
I
I think my
mm,
sort of take on that, and maybe
mm,
I'm misread or I'm not understanding, is that it's not the multinational companies. Like, so if somebody like
mm,
Bioderma, who sponsors our podcast, if they want to sell, if they were an American company and they want to sell in Europe, they have to follow the EU guidelines to a certain extent. So they kind of are doing it by default because these large companies want to sell around the world. But the problem I think in America and Canada too, to a certain extent, and I'm curious about Australia, is the small mom and pop shops because
mm,
they don't have access maybe to the ingredients that are maybe safe. I don't know. Maybe they might be contaminated things, or they're doing it in their garage, and they're not selling it in Europe, so they're not following the guidelines. So like they're going to put essential oils that are too high concentration and maybe sensitize people. So I think that regulations in the US should be improved for the smaller companies.
yeah, I think that's generally everyone's stance as well, I think. Like the
Yeah.
problem isn't like all the people going to grocery stores saying this is estrogenic, you need to stop using
Yeah.
it. It is
Yeah.
the smaller companies who don't know the rules. And
Right.
the nice thing about the EU is that it's all spelt out so clearly
It
what you
is.
have to do.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's a lot easier for smaller manufacturers. So usually it's the ones who are like, stop using supermarket products. They're all toxic. Use our thing, which
I
has
know.
like 50% essential oils. Yeah, that's definitely where the problem lies. And
Right.
it is the fact that it's not spelt out. There's no like clear regulations about what you can sell on Etsy,
Mhm.
whether or not you can mix things in your garage without a
Right.
preservative,
Right.
that kind of thing. Yeah.
And that's kind of a good lead up to the next
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I know we've been keep on touching on this, but maybe it's just a really good, clear explanation from you. So there's this common belief that natural ingredients are sort of inherently safer than synthetic ones. So if you can, I know I've learned so much from Sandy that this is not the case,
Yeah.
but I'd love for you to maybe explain your reasoning behind that to our
Yeah, so
listeners.
apart from the whole allergen thing where like nature is full of allergens, most things that are people react to in products are natural, things like essential oils. There's also other things in nature that are also unsafe. So one very famous example is iron oxides. They are the ingredients that are in foundation that give it the skin color.
Mhm.
The problem with these, they are natural, they're in lots of rocks, but the problem is if you get them from a natural source, they're actually heavily contaminated with heavy metals
Mm.
because, I mean, iron is a metal. There's
Mhm.
other heavy metals in nature as well. So the FDA has actually got a regulation that says it has to be synthetic. In other words, you have to like process it massively, turn it back into iron, and then react it again with oxygen to make the iron oxide
Oh,
because
interesting.
the natural stuff is too unsafe.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
yeah, so synthetics, a lot of the time you get a more consistent quality, a higher quality.
Yeah.
You can control the quality a lot better.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's lots of advantages with synthetic things. There's also the fact that nature, um, it is like a synthetic factory essentially, but it's not really a targeted one. Like things in nature are not meant to be good for your skin. There's no reason for
Yeah.
nature to evolve things that are good for your skin.
Right.
So
Right.
synthesis, like you can tweak different ingredients to make it more effective, to make it safer.
Right. And I think that's my big thing. I keep trying to get across in various episodes that um, that something may not be like this whole toxic. I hate that term because it's just poorly translates. It doesn't really make any sense in skincare. Um, is that it might be toxic for the environment, right? It might be cancer causing or hormone disruptive, but it can still give you a rash. So the two concepts aren't the same. So something can be natural and give you a rash, but be okay for the environment and whatever. But that people just don't equate the two. I think the pendulum's swinging though. And people understand that just because it's natural doesn't mean it's safe. So we're almost wrapping it up. And this sort of is, I'm really interested because I know there's been a bit of, I've seen some of your videos with a few other chemists about, dermatologists and plastic surgeons sort of talking about things that aren't correct online. So do you think there's enough collaboration between cosmetic chemists and dermatologists? How can that relationship be improved? And I think you had this thing about, we just watched this TikTok.
Talking, a plastic surgeon was talking about chemical sunscreens, and you were explaining why it was okay to use them. And you said, I'm not going to tell a plastic surgeon how to do their job. And
or how to cut something out. Why are they telling me how to put a cream on?
Yeah. I mean, it's not what they really were trained to do or to know about necessarily.
And they're giving the wrong information.
Yeah, I think some of it goes back to medical training. I think a lot of the time, and also I guess how doctors practice as well, like a lot of the time you do have a patient in front of you, they're asking you a question and you want to give them an answer that will be reassuring. But I think sometimes doctors take that sort of same approach online where there are other experts in the room who know better, who can give a better answer, and they still give that sort of like authoritative, like, I've got a coat on, listen to me sort of vibe. And I think, it's a bit of a problem. And I think sometimes like a lot of the public do see doctors as the ultimate authority on everything to do with health. So I think it is like a bit of a public education problem as well. So I think there needs to be more collaboration. I think also maybe just like in medical school, just tell people there are toxicologists who exist.
Right.
We're going to give you a quick overview of what happens, but this is not the final story. So
I wanted to thank you so much. Well, we're both going to thank you, but also tell everyone where they can find you. So Lab Muffin Beauty Science on TikTok, on Instagram. Your book, they can get it on Amazon. Listen to it, buy it. Oh, buy it because you want the copy and you want the beautiful, diagrams. It's really stunning, and this is fascinating. I love following you, and this conversation was wonderful. Thank you so much.
And I just want to thank you really for all your really hard work on skincare education. I think it's very commendable. I love how you don't back down. You take companies on, you take people to task, something I've been accused of doing as well, not to the same extent as you. And I just really appreciate everything you've done to help. I remember when that whole, there was something about, and you took the company to task, and I was like, okay, I really want to have this woman on the podcast. So thank you for your time today, and all the way from Australia. We didn't have too many glitches. Way to go, Ryan. So thanks. Is there anything you want to add to listeners before we leave? Something you want to, mention?
I guess my general advice is like, before you act on anything that you see on social media, whether it's buying a product or throwing out your products, just stop and pause before you do that. I think that will help a lot of people in a lot of situations.
That's great advice. Thank you again.
Please let us know what you thought of today's episode.
If you have any questions or thoughts, send me a message on social at Dr. Sandy Skotnicki. And don't forget, all the links and resources we mentioned are in the show notes.
And if you haven't already, please subscribe and leave us a review. It helps us to bring you the content you love.
Until next time, take care, and we'll see you next week on Skin to It.